We Speak for Ourselves, D. Watkins, another great book that I think you should pick up. UMBC's very own, all right, P. Nicole King, all right, Baltimore Revisited. Yes, put your hands together. Thank you, Ms. Jacob. You got Baltimore Revisited, great book, great essays. Not in My Neighborhood and Turpatella. This is a classic by now. Great chapter on redlining and the resident security map. We have The Struggle in the Urban South. David Taft Terry discusses the Baltimore Freedom Movement, another great book. And then Black Reconstruction in Baltimore, this book, A Brotherhood of Liberty by Dennis Patrick Halpin. So there are other resources that I encourage people to pick up to learn about Baltimore City, the Baltimore metropolitan area, Baltimore County, and understand the history, how we are where we are, why we are where we are today. The other thing I like to say is that social science is so very critical in America right now. This is a time when people are crying out for the knowledge that we bring from our various disciplines. And so we have to do all that we can to bring the knowledge that we have, the knowledge that we've learned to a public audience. And this is a very critical time for that. So let's jump right in. I want to talk with you today about mapping Baltimore Apartheid. There's my book to the right, The Black Butterfly, The Harmful Politics of Race and Space in America, coming out January 26th next year. So let's zoom into this big, beautiful map of Baltimore City. And I'm going to walk you through and tell you a story about how Baltimore really sort of developed to be the place that it is today. So we start with Central West Baltimore. Once upon a time, 1902, May the 7th, the Buffalo Commercial, they wrote this article, and you see it's a bit cut off here, Negro Invasion. White residents of one of Baltimore's swell sections up in arms. And all right, this is where I need a volunteer. Since they made me host, I'm going to use power. Yes.
Lawrence, can I ask you to maximize your screen? A couple of people are asking about maximizing the screen so they can see it better.
Okay, let me see if I can do that.
You're in an Apple environment, right? So
yes. Does this help any?
That's better. I think you might be able to make it even bigger.
Well, I need to be able to control the X a little bit. So this is about as big.
Okay, that's better.
That's about as big as I can make it.
That's good. So, thank you.
That is important since I'm asking for readers. I need one reader to read the very first sentence, if you can. The very first sentence in this
presentation. The chat feature is.
Okay, well, maybe that's not such a good idea to somebody with a lot of noise. So I'll read it. It says, the invasion of the western end of Drill Hill Avenue, one of the approaches to the park, by Negro residents is damaging real estate values and arousing hostile feeling among the white residents and property owners. And right there in the first sentence, in this article written over 118 years ago, you see the rationale. One rationale, the major rationale given for racial segregation, and that is that somehow the blackness of someone's skin, if they move in, that it's going to damage real estate values. I was talking with, had a couple of presentations yesterday, and I usually ask the question, is this notion still with us today? And somebody said 1,000% yes, this notion is still with us, that somehow when Black people move in, it damages real estate values. I should say right now, back at this moment in time, Black people call either Negro or colored. And so we're going to see both of those terms used in these articles that I'm showing to you. So here's Fannie Williams, a colored laundress, recently moved into a house on Drill Hill Avenue and was the first to break the color line above Mosher Street. And so there's somehow this interest in Baltimore up in Buffalo, New York, and they're covering the story in 1902. Now, here is City Hall. City Hall is where ordinances, laws are passed, where the mayor and city council convene and they govern the city. So City Hall passed this major ordinance in 1910, 8 years later. And here, the New York Times Magazine, we're back in Central West Baltimore, they cover the story. And they have the title, Baltimore Tries Drastic Plan of Race Segregation, Strange Situation which led the Oriole City to adopt the most pronounced Jim Crow measure on record. And what had happened was this man right here, the man in the middle, Baltimore Mayor John Barry Mahul, he and the city council, they passed the first residential racial zoning ordinance in American history on December the 10th, 1910. And you can actually get a sense of what was going on if you could pull this article up and read it, but I'll give you a quick synopsis. This man right here, this black man named George McMecken, he moved into 1834 McCullough Street, this house right here. And when he moved in, he did what black people do. He said, yes, we can. We're moving on up. We finally got a piece of the pie. But when the white community saw that he moved in, they said, oh, no, you can't. And so you can actually see in the picture the broken windows that came about when the white community threw rocks through his window. They threw bricks through the skylight of the roof of his home. And so they were trying to intimidate him. They were trying to say, you are not welcome here. That was in July, in the summer of 1910. And then I think the white community said, well, maybe it's better to do this thing in a legal way. And so they passed this law. In the New York Times Magazine, they cover it, they call it a drastic plan. Keep that in mind for later on. So now we go to very north portion of Baltimore, and where we have the Roland Park Company. Now, I know some of you may live in some of the neighborhoods I'm talking about. I want you to know in advance that when I talk about your neighborhood, please do not take it personally. This is just the history of what has happened. So the Roland Park Company, they developed 4 neighborhoods. They developed right here, Roland Park, Guilford, Homeland, and then later in the 1930s, they developed Northwood Community. But these communities in north central Baltimore, actually in 1912, were actually still a part of Baltimore County. I'm going to show you a map later on because Baltimore didn't grow to the size that it is today until 6 years later. But this gentleman right here, Edward Bowden, he was the general manager. And he and his company, they pioneered the use of community-wide racially restrictive covenants. Now, what are restrictive covenants? Restrictive covenants are like the deed to your house. So it would be like someone giving you the deed. It's congratulations, you are now a new homeowner, and you have to keep the yard cut, keep the shrubs trimmed, keep your driveway clean. And oh, by the way, when you sell your home, you cannot sell it to any Negroes. And so that is a racially restrictive covenant, barring homeowners from selling their homes to anybody of African origin. And this was a real estate strategy. This was designed to keep the neighborhood pure. And I should say that while African Americans were blocked from living in these homes as homeowners, actually some were living there as domestic maids, as groundskeepers, but not as homeowners. I should say that Jewish people were also discriminated against as well, except they didn't do it overtly. They actually sent out a private investigator, and she would go and look at the prospective home buyer's house and go and check them out to see if she could find any signs of Jewishness. And if she did, she would go back to the office and say, we can't sell them the home. And so they were also blocked from living. So Baltimore had a 3-tiered racial segregation system: Anglo-Saxon white, Jewish, and then Black people at the bottom. So that was 1912. You can read more about this in this article in Johns Hopkins Magazine. So now we go back to West Central Baltimore, the Upton Druid Heights community. Lots of action taking place in this community, as you can tell. And here we get the Baltimore Sun. The Baltimore Sun gets involved. Utah place threatened by Negro invasion now, in big, bold letters. And so they say right here, other streets involved and property owners will meet tonight to plan resistance. And so this is a whole thing that the Baltimore Sun is putting the word out. And look at what they say: a threatened invasion of the Utah Place and the 1 and 200 blocks of West Landville Street by Negroes, since Judge Elliott declared the race segregation ordinance invalid, has stirred property owners and residents of Northwest Baltimore. It is rumored that a Negro family is seeking a house in the 1600 block. So I want you to see what the Baltimore Sun is doing. I know some of you might like the Baltimore Sun. You might subscribe to the Baltimore Sun. But this is how they were acting at this point in time. Look at how they were giving out the actual blocks: 1 and 200 block of West Landville Street, 1600 block, Utah Place, 1900 block over here, 1700 block of McCullough Street down here. They're actually giving the blocks where Black people are moving in. And they're alerting the white property owners that there's a threatened invasion by the Negroes. They're coming in, and the Baltimore Sun is giving a play-by-play for the white community. So then we go back to Northwest Baltimore. Now we arrive in Mount Washington. And in this community, we're now in 1913. And we have my former college, Morgan College, which is today Morgan State University. They tried to move to Mount Washington, and they did, just like I said, they were saying, yes, we can. We finally got a piece. We're moving on up. We finally got a piece of the pie. But the Mount Washington community said, oh, no, you Negroes can't. And we got the receipts right here. Charles C. Homer Jr., acting chairman of the executive committee of the Mount Washington Improvement Association. So they got involved to lobby the city government. And we see they tried to get the next mayor. The next mayor is James Preston. And they tried to get him to attend the meeting. And he said, oh, guys, sorry, I got 3 appointments Monday night. I got things going on. I'm real busy. But I want to let you know, I think the establishment of Morgan College at that point would have a very serious effect upon property values at Mount Washington. So Mayor Preston is trotting out the same justification. He's trotting out the same rationale. And we see here Charles C. Homer Jr., he wrote the mayor, and they were very clear about what the meeting was for. It said they were holding it on Monday, September 29th, 1913 at 8 p.m. at the casino at Mount Washington for the purpose of giving expression to the feeling of protest against the invasion of established white neighborhoods by Negro institutions or residents as threatened by the contemplated establishment of Morgan College at Mount Washington. So Mount Washington, that community says, we don't want this Negro institution. We don't want these Negro residents moving into our community. So they blocked Morgan College. And then we see here a little later in 1913, the St. Louis Star and Times, they covered the story. And it's interesting, we'll talk about a little later, why would St. Louis be so interested in what's going on? But look at what they say. Baltimore is fussed up because colored folk insist on living next to white folks. Several persons having been shot, more or less, heads having been dented by door nicks or rocks of assorted sizes, and hundreds of windows and other attached portions of real property having been smashed completely and enthusiastically. And so look at the title, Baltimore and Race War over invasion of Negro whites fight to protect home district from Black residents. Now, why would St. Louis be so interested? Well, I told you, 1910, Baltimore became the first city to pass a residential racial zoning by ordinance. In 1916, 3 years later, St. Louis becomes the first city to pass a racial zoning ordinance via referendum. So they're watching Baltimore because they're already plotting. They're plotting to do something similar, and they want to tell the story about what's going on in Baltimore to help their cause. So look at the role of newspapers and how they're using and sort of spreading the word about what's happening. And so over here they say Mount Washington is a high-class suburban development next door to Roland Park. So they want to let it be known they're real close to Roland Park because which everyone knows is the most unusual and beautiful residence tract in the nation. So they're saying Roland Park is high class, and we may not be all the way up there, but the St. Louis Star-Times letting them know that Mount Washington is pretty close. And so the suburb is proud. So they block Morgan College from moving into that community. So now we go to Northeast Baltimore. This is the Laurelville community. And this is where Morgan College tries to move 4 years later. I should mention during this time, Morgan College was actually in central West Baltimore. And so they were trying to find a new home because they had received a big donation from Andrew Carnegie. And he said, I'll give you the donation, but I need you to get a larger campus. I need you to be able to have the space you need to expand. So now Morgan College looks at Laurelville community. And here's the Baltimore Sun again, fights Negro invasion. Laurelville is up in arms against Morgan College. And we see here the writer says, Laurelville has blood in its eye for any invasion of its 99% pure white community by a Negro institution or colony or settlement of any kind. So they're making it real clear Laurelville, white Laurelville is hopping hot and mad that there's a potential Negro college, colony, settlement. They don't want anything to do with the Negro community. We got the receipts. Frederick Evans, president of the Laurelville Improvement Association, will be chief spokesperson. Now, I said earlier, we saw that the city was passing the ordinance from the top down. Pay attention and see how neighborhood associations, improvement associations, how they're lobbying for racial segregation from the bottom up. So it's happening in both ways, from the top down, and is being promoted, lobbied by folks, white people living in neighborhoods via their neighborhood associations. And so the Baltimore Sun, they go on and look at this heading. I like the heading, the way they sort of set the scene. Hall is packed. You're like, ooh, wee, what's going on? The hall is packed. Nearly 275 men and women, not counting children, packed the hall by 8 o'clock for the meeting and stayed until a complete plan of opposition to the Negro institution and colony had been perfected. A big delegation assured for today. And an emergency war fund of $71.50 was raised. The 50 cents was given by a woman. Women took active part in the town meeting and will be a large factor in the delegation today. So the Baltimore Sun is letting it be known that everybody is involved. There's a whole community trying to stop and block this Negro college from moving in. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Here's a map of the former boundary of Baltimore City. It was a lot smaller. The northernmost boundary of the city up until 1918 was actually East Cold Springs Lane. So Laurelville is actually still in Baltimore County at the time, as was Roland Park, Guilford, Homeland, Mount Washington. So these were all in the county, although the Roland Park Company, they actually connected their sewer lines to Baltimore City. So they were very much connected, literally actually connected. And you can see more about that in Paige Glosser's book, How the Suburbs Were Segregated. But you see here that this is the sort of politics of the time. The annexation bill was not passed until 1918. And so there's Towson UMBCs down here. So you got this sort of layout of the land at the time. So now we go back to City Hall. And why was Laurelville concerned about a suburban colony? Because Mayor Preston was proposing a suburban colony. To aid 90,000 Negroes, he wanted to move some Black people out to the county. And here's where you see my field. My field gets involved, public health. We see here Dr. William T. Howard Jr., acting commissioner of health, presented statistics showing that the death rate among the Negroes was nearly 100% greater than among white people due to the conditions under which they live. And so public health is now being used as the justification for uprooting and displacing Black people, the Negro community in Baltimore City. And so A lot of people love data. A lot of people love to work with big data, and they think data is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But I'm here to tell you that we have to be careful because data, like these statistics over here, they're talking about tuberculosis, pneumonia, syphilis, influenza, poliomyelitis, the whooping cough, diarrhea, chronic heart disease. And they're saying, look, Black people, these Negroes are diseased. They got way more. So we got to get rid of them. That's either we have to get rid of them, uproot them, or we have to segregate them, quarantine them. So public health medicine is complicit in the use of data, weaponizing it to justify racial segregation and forced displacement. And you see right here, physician gives statistics. So this is why we have to be careful with our data, careful with statistics. Just because somebody is using fancy numbers and statistical equations does not mean that it's being used in the right way. The data, statistics can be weaponized. And that's why we need the social sciences, by the way, to really be able to interpret and find out and figure out when and where that's happening. So this is a good picture of Mayor James Preston. He's standing on the steps, him and his homeboys. They dressed up real nice. I want you to see who we talking about, Mayor James Preston, right here in the middle, the man in the middle. And so that's him right there. So I have to say, Mayor James Preston is the most racist mayor in Baltimore City's history. Now, Dr. Brown, why would you say something like that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this newspaper article says new segregation plan. Whenever one plan failed, he had a new plan following right up. He was not deterred. He was just saying, oh, that plan failed. Let's come up with a new segregation plan. And so here it is, and it makes it very clear how my field is implicated to protect city's health. So public health. The mayor, however, has conceived the idea of an ordinance based upon a municipality's police powers. So we had a lot of discussion about the police this year. Well, now at that time, they needed somebody to enforce the segregation law. So you had the police involved. So the police were involved to protect the health of its citizens, which would segregate Negroes in this city because having a much higher rate of tuberculosis among them than there is among the whites, they constitute a menace to the health of the white population. So white public health was protected. Black public health was neglected. And this was made strikingly clear in this Baltimore Sun article, where you see systems involved from the mayor to the police to the public health system. They're all engaged and involved. Now, here's a good example of the uprooting I was talking about earlier. Across the street from Mercy Hospital, many of you might know where this is, St. Paul Street, standing looking south toward the harbor. There once was a Black community here called Gallows Hill. And you can see it's no longer there anymore. This is if you're standing in front of the hospital looking towards the park area, that's the view you would see. And so here's the Municipal Journal of Baltimore. It's issued by the city government, and this is 1917. They're asking what can be done to improve the living conditions of Baltimore's Negro population. And so we see right here, once again, they're saying they're using these statistics to talk about Black people and to stigmatize Black people. 40% of the deaths from tuberculosis in Baltimore occur among Negroes, who, numbering approximately 90,000, represent the 15% of the population. So they're saying so they're actually talking about health disparities. They're actually talking about health disparities. They're using the data, but they're using it in a wicked way. And so right here we see, as the mayor has pointed out, the evil effects of the unhealthy state of the Negro race are not confined within their own numbers. With little, if any, knowledge of their home surroundings, we call upon these people to serve us in our households, prepare our food, tend our children, and perform countless other services wherein personal contact is a matter of course. Regardless of our efforts to maintain sanitary and healthful environment for ourselves and families, the insidious influence of slum conditions is carried into our very midst to defile and destroy. And so you see that they're referring to the labor connection. Many Black people at this time were domestic, like I said earlier, domestic maids, lawnskeepers, cooks, and they're serving in white people's homes. And so they say, look, we call upon these people, and they coming in our home and they bringing disease. And so we got to do something to protect ourselves, because when they bring those slum conditions, those insidious influence of the slum conditions, when they come in, it's coming into our midst to defile and destroy. So this is very explicit. Again, my field, public health, is being lifted up as an explicit justification and rationalization for racial segregation. And so we see right here, they're talking about different solutions. They say no one of them, however, solves the whole problem. The withdrawal of several hundred Negro families from the congested districts to suburban settlements will undoubtedly make more room for those who are left behind. So that's where the city is being very explicit. We need to uproot and take several hundred Black families, move them to the suburbs, Laurelville, or some. That's what So this is why Laurelville was afraid of the Negro colony, and they thought Morgan College was going to be the first step, a beachhead for the quote unquote Negro invasion. So here's the Municipal Journal again. Need for better housing for Negroes revealed in tuberculosis statistics. And we see it again. Here they talk about Baltimore death rate today we're dealing with COVID. Back then, the major epidemic was tuberculosis. So they're saying Baltimore death rate is 1.9 per 1,000 population, which is higher than it is in Boston, New York, Philadelphia. And look what they say, but this is largely explained by the difference in the proportion of Negro population. So they're saying, yeah, we have a higher rate because of the Negroes. They're blaming it on the Negroes. The Negroes have this higher rate of disease. And so that's why we're higher than other percentages. And what they say right here, the application of more radical measures are demanded. So keep in mind, this is all being stated to help justify racial segregation, and it's being called by the Baltimore Municipal Journal a more radical measure. It's saying that this is demanded. We have no choice. They're bringing all this disease. There's too much disease in the Negro community. We need radical measures. And so one of the radical measures which would seem advisable in dealing with this situation is the elimination of certain congested sections populated by Negroes, in which has been noted a very high percentage of deaths from this and other communicable diseases. The remedy suggested is the tearing down of these pest holes and the converting of the areas into parks. Oh, I wish I could talk to somebody if y'all didn't have all this noise in the chat thing going on, but look at that language. Pest holes. Who lives in a pest hole? What is a pest hole? And don't we have a politician that said something last year to the effect that Baltimore is a rat and rodent infested mess where no human being will want to live? I thought we had a politician that said something very similar to this notion of pest holes, because what lives in the pest hole is rodents, rats. Thank you, Morgan. That's an excellent citation right there. I urge folks to read that. Infectious Fear, Samuel K. Roberts. So pest holes. Now, pests. So they're actually, you can see they're referring to Black people as rodents, as rats. And what do you do with rodents and rats? You exterminate them. Now, this language of dehumanization is something that's used multiple times to justify all kinds of forms of oppression and exploitation and domination. In Nazi Germany, they referred to the Jewish community as vermin. Vermin, rats, rodents. Again, what do you do with rats and rodents? You exterminate them. So the concentration camps, the dehumanization culturally, verbally, in the media, that is what sets up the exploitation, the domination. It sets up the genocide afterwards. Dehumanization on the front end, exploitation and domination on the back end. Many times in America, we refer to, or not we, but some Americans refer to people migrating from Central America as insects, hordes. And again, that's setting up because what do you do with insects? You gotta exterminate them, right? You have to get rid of these insects. You just gotta squash them. So now that sets up the ICE camps. That sets up the abusive, the vile policy that America has at the border. So this language is very telling. This language is very telling. And the thing is, look, they're converted. It's converted to a beautiful park, but Black people are nowhere around to enjoy it. They're uprooted. They've been pushed out, kicked out. And this is what the rationale was at the time: dehumanization, uprooting, and putting Black folks out. And so then in 1922, 5 years later, we got the Nebraska State Journal now. Color line with vengeance, Baltimore citizens violently resent invasion of Negro, and this time you have a Negro principal. He moves into a solid white block, but they say today the front of his new house was a wreck. Every window was shattered, the front door barely hanging, red and blue ink spattered over the marble steps and window blinds. The result of white residents of the neighborhood storming the house early today in resentment of the Negro invasion. So this was a violent period, white supremacist, urban violence. A lot of times we think of white supremacy as something that happens way deep in the rural areas in the backwoods in somebody's backyard. But this is saying it's happening in the urban. Now, we think of Baltimore today as a majority Black city. Baltimore is still super majority white at this time. So this was a very scary, very violent period in Baltimore's history shaping. Now, I have to say this article says sometimes Negroes fought back. It wasn't always one-sided. And so there's a series of attacks. 3 of the homes occupied by white families were attacked, police believe, in retaliation. So there was back and forth in some instances now. It wasn't always Black people sitting back and accepting the violence. But here you see the police was called. Captain Charles Lassner, Northwest District, said he believed the attacks on the Negroes' homes were made by gangs of boys. And once again, the Baltimore Sun, the residents of the 16 and 1700 blocks of Madison Avenue are incensed over what they term a Negro invasion. Oh my goodness. What do we have here? The Ku Klux Klan, they was marching in Baltimore, y'all. They were marching in 1925, and we got the receipts right here. You got Union Avenue, Roland Avenue, and so that's right here on this map, Union and Roland in the Hamden community. And this is several hundred Klan members. They marching right down the street in the broad daylight. In the broad daylight, they having a good old rally, got their little costumes on and everything, hoodies. They got the white. They got the robes on. They got the sash. So they're just having a good time in Baltimore City. And I don't see nobody on the sidewalk saying, hey, y'all need to get out here. They're standing and watching. They're standing and watching. Must not have too big of a problem with the Ku Klux Klan. Now, if I had the good sense, I would have put in another slide that showed you an article from the Baltimore Sun that showed that the Ku Klux Klan started a church. Oh my goodness, they started a church in Harford County in 1924. And the Baltimore Sun, their reporter, they describe it like it's a fashion show. They said, they got gorgeous robes. You got the Grand Dragon, the Kleagles, the Titans, and the Cyclopses. And they're saying a prayer, and they're saying they're opening the church. And they're just welcoming in all the good white folks into the Klan church near Harvard of Grace in Harford County, in 1924. So this was during the height of the second Klan. Y'all may not know this, but the Ku Klux Klan really had like 3 different major periods. The first Klan, they emerged right after the Civil War. The former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, he founds the first Klan in 1865 in Pulaski County, Tennessee. So then the winning general of the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant, he becomes president. And so Congress passes the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, and they crushed the Klan. They beat up the Klan so bad that the Klan disbands. Then that's Klan 1.0. Now, other white supremacist groups, they emerged like the Redcoats, the White Knights. So you had other white supremacist groups, but the Klan was crushed. So the second Klan, they emerged in 1915 after the movie, this major motion picture that comes out called The Birth of a Nation, produced by D.W. Griffith, and it's a smash. It breaks records. It's a revolutionary motion picture, introduces all kinds of technical innovations, but it glorifies the Klan. And so it depicts the Klan, here's the media again, or a form of media, depicting the Klan as saving, redeeming the white South from the loss to the Union Army. And so inspired by this depiction, the Klan rises again. And so this is the second Klan right here marching down the street in Baltimore City, in the Hamden community. So then we go to 1937. Now the federal government gets involved. And so we have here, this is in Freddie Gray's future community, about 60, 70 years before he's born. Sandtown, Winchester is graded with the grade of a D. And there's not nobody on this webinar that really likes having a D on their report card, but that's the grade this community got. Well, why did they get that grade? Detrimental influences, obsolescence, old housing, Negro concentration, excessive ground. Wait a minute, Negro concentration? So the Negro concentration is viewed as a detrimental influence by the federal government. Foreign-born mixture, 15%. So obviously, the federal government at this time is xenophobic. Negro, yes, 80%. Infiltration of, and somebody fills out, Negro. So the federal government is using race to stigmatize, to marginalize, and to grade an entire community. That's Central West Baltimore. This is Central East Baltimore, Greenmount area or so, somewhere around there. It also gets the grade of a D. Why? Detrimental influences. Heavy concentration of foreigners. I told you the government was xenophobic. Look at this, foreign-born Italians, 25%. So you had white immigrants coming to America, y'all, white immigrants. And they were, well, see, I can't ask nobody. But the reason why they were coming from Italy was because the rise of fascism. Benito Mussolini, he was acting a plumb fool. And the Italians said, we got to get out of here. We got to go. We got to immigrate. We got to come to America, the land of opportunity. And so they get up and they get out. And this happens with the Polish. This happens with the Russian Jewish community. This happens with Irish folks. You have the rise of Nazis in Germany. Hitler was getting ready to do his crazy and vile thing. So white European immigrants are like, we got to go. We got to get out and find a place of safety. But when they arrived in America, oh my goodness, when they arrived, they were stigmatized. They were marginalized. Now, fortunately for them, they were white. Because they were white, they could assimilate, they could acculturate. But we see here, when they first arrived, they were demonized. Negro, yes, 25%. Infiltration of Negro. And so these forms, NS Form -8, June the 6th, 1937, these forms were used by the United States federal government to create the most devastating series of maps in American history. This 4 color-coded map, red, blue, yellow, and green, of Baltimore City, and as you can see, some portions of Baltimore County as well were red lined, yellow lined, blue lined, and green lined. A lot of people only refer to one color, red lining. No. There were 4 different linings going on at the same time, and that's important. Let's take a look at the legend. We zoom in. Remember, they got the grade of a D. You had a D, your community was colored red. You got a C, your community was colored yellow. If you got a B, it was colored blue, and an A, it was colored green. So what did this all mean? And before I answer that, the technical name is the residential security map. Residential security from what? Residential security from who? And so this is the map the Homeowners Loan Corporation, they created They later become the Federal Housing Administration. So the federal government, they create these maps, and as some of you likely know, this map was determining which communities got access to capital. So it determined who had lending from banks for home loans for small businesses. And if you read in Tara Patel's Not in My Neighborhood, he has a great chapter in here on this very thing. He talks about how the pseudoscience of eugenics was used to rank people in a racial hierarchy. So white Anglo-Saxons lived in the green. Remember, Jewish people were barred, so many of them lived in the blue communities. Those European immigrants I talked about earlier, they're just getting to America, trying to make a way out of no way. They're in the yellow communities, and then urban Native Americans and Black folks, they are stuck in the red. And so if you would live in the green or blue community, the bankers would love to see you. They'd be like, oh, whoo, so glad to see you. Mr. Johnson, so glad to see you. Thank you for coming to our bank today. I know you live in a green or blue community. So, hey, how about I give you that 2.5 or 3% interest rate, and I'm going to give you like $300,000-$400,000 to buy your home. And that person walks out, whoo, all right, so good to live in a blue and green community. If a yellow person from a yellow community walks in the bank, the banker is like, I don't know. Those European immigrants, they live over there in those yellow communities. So I don't know how trustworthy you guys are, but okay, I guess I'll give you a home loan at a 4% interest rate and maybe for $200,000. The person from the yellow community walks out, whew, all right, I didn't get a good interest rate as low as I wanted, but at least I got a home financed by the bank. But if you were living in a red community, the bankers would not even want to talk to you. You cannot get a loan. You cannot get a federally financed home loan protected by the federal government because this is coming out of the Great Depression. So the federal government gets involved to protect the financial industry, which had gone haywire on Black Monday, the Great Depression. But folks living in the red communities, they couldn't get access to capital. Banks wouldn't lend, couldn't finance their small businesses with these banks. And therefore, these communities were starved of capital year after year, decade after decade. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know what happens to a community that's starved of capital. I asked people yesterday, they say it's dilapidated. It becomes blighted. Toxic lead stays on the wall because people don't have the capital to fix it. And when they do get loans, they're subprimed. So they're paying extra to the bank, extra to the blockbuster in some instances. So Black people don't have the capital. Toxic lead poisoning, that plays a devastating role. And then eventually you get to the 80s, crack cocaine, the devastation. Then because people are on corners, because these jobs are not located, the small businesses never got financed. So now they're on the corner, and now you have to protect your corner to make ends meet. And so then there's violence, gang violence. Crime goes through the roof in the 90s. And so you have the whole apparatus of the war on drugs, hyper policing in these hyper segregated communities. But it intensifies with this rationale right here. And wait a minute, what's this right here in the corner? Compiled with the assistance of data furnished by the Department of Public Works, Bureau of Plans and Services, City of Baltimore. The City of Baltimore helps the federal government redline, demonize Black communities. I like that citation. Jessica Charleston's an excellent book to read, Segregation by Design. Only reason I don't have it with me because it's in my office. But the city, the federal government, red line, yellow line, blue line, and green line, its own community. So the city is complicit. And we see here from the Zillow study that from 1997 to 2017, 80 years later, look at how the home values in red, yellow, green, and blue communities are still impacted by the way that the resident security map was used in the 30s. And even though green and blue have flipped, both all yellow, green, and blue are still well above homes in red communities. So it had a long lasting impact, and we see that it led to this word right here, Segrenomics. It's a term coined by a scholar named Noliwe Rooks in her book Cutting School. She talks about it with education. I like it as a term that applies broadly, that that Segrenomics is really the economic weaponization of racial segregation. That's the damage of segregation, not Black people not living next to white people. That's not the real damage, because Black people can be successful in their own neighborhoods. But when you impose Segrenomics, when you deprive neighborhoods of capital decade after decade, that is the damage. That is the damage that is done. That is the system that is still with us today. This is what I'm talking about in my book, and I hope folks are able to pick it up, because I go into a whole lot more than that. But at this point, I'll basically end, because our time is coming up. And so I'll end by saying this: we cannot make Black lives matter if we don't make Black neighborhoods matter. Thank you.
Lawrence, do you have time for a few questions, or do you have to run?
Yeah, I have time for a few.
Okay, so Rob, you want to handle this, or Michelle? I'm looking there.
Sure. I'll just read these questions as they pop up here. So one question is, can you speak to the social equity bond?
Yes. Basically, it's a concept that I created to help heal all of what I talked about earlier. So this is it. $3 billion is what I propose. And this is really just a down payment. There are other solutions I talk about in my book, but you can see roughly half of this $3 billion is getting rid of lead, getting rid of that toxic lead, because it damages the brain. And when people are still babies are being poisoned in Baltimore City. Babies like Freddie Gray when he was a child, or Corinne Gaines, who was killed in Baltimore County by the Baltimore County Police. Both poisoned by toxic lead as children in Baltimore City. And there's no way you're going to fix issues in Baltimore without getting that heavy metal that does not belong in the human body out of the environment. That, to me, is, as a public health person, that's something that has to be paramount. And then the other half is dealing with, in many ways, the repercussions of all of the racial inequity. These neighborhoods need to have redlining undone. So $500 million to kickstart neighborhood community-driven redevelopment. Need help with substance abuse treatment, social work, counseling, money for that. Eliminating transit, biking, and food apartheid in the Black Butterfly, $255 million for that. And violence prevention. Right now, there are about 5 safe street sites. I think they're trying to get to 10. They need to go to 25 or 30. Violence prevention needs to be a major, massively funded effort. Just can't rely on police. As a matter of fact, you probably shouldn't rely on police. Policing, as much money has been spent in Baltimore City, has not gotten the job done. And that's really because policing can't get the job done. And I don't want to wait until something happens to police it. We need to prevent the violence before it starts. And that's why you hear a lot of activists calling for defunding the police, taking money from the police, putting it towards the health, human services that support life, and especially violence prevention.
Next question I see here. I've been told that lead abatement is more costly than tearing down the houses and rebuilding altogether. Can you comment on this?
In some instances, yes, that's true. I think there needs to be a broad city of which homes you can abate, which homes you need to be deconstructed, not demolished, because if you demolish it, if you're not very careful, the lead dust gets in the air, where people down the street can breathe in the lead dust particles. Lead is really, really tricky. The science, you have to be very scientific, very sharp when you're dealing with toxic lead. You can't play around and fool around and not know the science behind it. So there needs to be that major mobilization. So yes, in some cases, deconstruction. In other cases, there are things you can do to abate it. And that's just in the home now. It's also in the soil, it's sometime in the water, it's in the air down in Curtis Bay, South Baltimore. So it's pervasive. It's a toxic metal that doesn't belong in the human body. So it has to be a huge effort to get rid of it.
I see a question. In your talk, you demonstrate how data and forms of expert knowledge are used to make segregationist arguments, particularly in public news outlets. In your archival research, did you find different uses of data or knowledge across news types, for instance, in the Baltimore Afro-American?
That's a great question. I didn't so much, but I think more so because my book was really trying to document how racist policies, practices, systems, and budgets really sort of emerge. So there's a whole anti-racist story, a whole Baltimore Freedom Movement story. Maybe you find it in, wait a minute, what happened to my camera? Okay, maybe you find it in this book right here, The Struggle in the Urban South. Maybe he talks about it, David Taft Terry, but that wasn't the focus of my book.
I see a question from Paula. In your research, did you come across how eminent domain was used by the city in Black neighborhoods in Baltimore?
Oh, yes. And I will talk about it extensively. Eminent domain, particularly with EBDI, but urban renewal, building highways through Black community. There are multiple ways that uprooting occurred in Baltimore City and around the nation. So eminent domain is one of them. And I try to go into, I think, the multiple ways, because they're all justified legally by eminent domain. Thank you for the comments. I appreciate it.
I don't know if there are any other questions. I have a question I could throw out there. I wonder, Mr. Brown, if you've seen sort of the impact, both the public health impact and the economic impact of Corona in Black neighborhoods.
Well, after the initial outbreak, so you're talking about Seattle, cruise ships. After that initial outbreak, the first area where COVID really struck was hyper-segregated cities. New York, Detroit, Chicago, New Orleans, which was formerly hyper-segregated. So cities that had done a lot to redline their communities, that's where COVID really slammed in that first wave. Now it's actually hitting rural America really hard. Right now, it's hitting North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, where I'm at right now. So it's hit the Midwest and the rural areas in the later phases. But hyper-segregated cities were the first wave, and I saw it as it was unfolding, and I was like, "Yep, the hyper-segregated cities are the tip of American apartheid." But as we've seen with demonstrations after the murder of George Floyd, as we've seen, the issues in urban America spill over and they impact suburban and rural America. Protests were happening not just in big cities, but small cities and towns as well. So, American apartheid is something that's with us. And I think COVID-19 is actually a pretty good detector. It's a pretty good hotspot detector of where American apartheid is really devastating people the most.
I think we're probably going to have to stop pretty soon. Lawrence, thank you for a terrific presentation. I have one question for you.
Yes.
Are you planning to make an audiobook recording of this book? Because I would love to hear you narrate this.
Oh, wow. That's a great question and comment. I know the publisher is planning to do an audiobook, I think 6 months after the release, so maybe by August or so. I don't know if I'll narrate it, but
I can't imagine a better narrator of this story than you.
It would be pretty interesting. It would be a lively audiobook, I can tell you that.
Well, thanks everybody for attending. This has really been exciting, disturbing, and eye-opening. Even for those of us who have read books like Antero Piatella's book, the archival research is amazing. And I'm sorry I never had the chance to meet you before. Wisconsin's gain is our loss, but we're very happy to have had you deliver our seminar today. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you all. I really appreciate you.
Okay, everyone, there will be a recording posted at some point. We are still trying to figure out where we're going to post them, but that will happen sometime fairly soon. Thanks very much.